Hi, this is Craig Stocks, and this is my photo critique of the day. So thank you for joining us for the walk through this wonderful image that was submitted by Stephanie Elaine. So Stephanie, thank you so much for submitting the image. She did tell me in her note that she had never done a still life before, so she was playing around with lighting. And by playing around with lighting, you also wind up playing around with shadow. And I think this is a great illustration of the power of shadow. I get the sense a lot of people have been taught or have picked up somewhere to be somewhat afraid of shadows, and so they use flash or lighting or somehow thinking they need to eliminate shadows. And in reality, light is nothing without shadows, and this is just an excellent example. As you look at this sculpture in this still life, if we didn't have the shadows created by the different shapes on the sculpture and the oblique lighting coming in from the side, you really wouldn't know much about this sculpture other than its outline. So really a good job from Stephanie exploring light, exploring shadow, and how they interact with each other to really bring out the texture and the form and the shape and the substance of this sculpture. So I think that's a good job with that, and really a good example of the power of light and shadow, and how, like I said, light is nothing without shadow. I think Rick Sammon made the comment that light illuminates, shadows define, and this is a great example of that. I also like the interplay. The wood texture creates kind of some horizontal lines here that match nicely with the horizontal shadow from the sculpture. So we have these nice horizontal lines contrasting with the very soft shape of the sculpture, and I think that works real well in the composition also. There's a couple things that I might think about in a perfect world. For instance, it would be nice if these knots weren't in the wood in the background, and that's something that you could take out pretty easily in Photoshop if you're it depends on how you feel about modifying your images, or possibly if you had noticed that while you were shooting and maybe moved the camera angle or the sculpture a little bit one way or the other, you might have been able to either avoid those or hide them behind the sculpture. But as I look at the frame, the way it's framed here, there's a couple things that feel a little bit off to me. The light's obviously coming from the left, which often tends to feel more natural to us, I think, because we read from left to right, so it's more natural to read an image from left to right, and having the light on the left side and the shadow on the right side just kind of feels right to us. But we do wind up with a lot of negative space on the right-hand side, and that may be to accommodate the shadow, but I think it could be cropped a little bit differently. And also perhaps the left side here is fairly bright compared to the right side, and just exploring a little bit that if I throw an adjustment in here and darken that side down a little bit, that I think that gives it maybe just a little bit more balanced feeling by matching the background from left to right a little bit better. And then also exploring a crop, possibly centering the sculpture, and maybe even taking out some of the foreground and background so it's a little bit tighter crop, and that really accentuates the sculpture a little bit more and avoids that feeling of being just a little bit lopsided. That there's a lot of things you could do with an image like this, that because we read left to right, sometimes it's nice to have a lot of negative space, and because we're reading left to right and the light is coming from left to right, I think it feels more natural to have the negative space to the left. And just as a comparison, I did a quick sample in Photoshop where I stretched out the left-hand side so I could create more negative space on the other side of the image. And it has a lot of negative space, but it still has kind of a balanced feel. So if you want negative space, play with different positions of how you position and where you put that negative space. The other thing you could do with an object like this, and come back to Stephanie's image, because this is a very abstract shape and you have lots of interesting light and shadow things going on, sometimes it's fun to play with close-ups. That, for instance, you could put on a macro lens, or a lot of lenses now will focus pretty close in between focusing and cropping. You can get somewhat close-ups and just play with taking different segments of it and find interesting abstract compositions just within a shape that you're already working with. And sometimes it's interesting what you can find as a picture inside a picture. So overall, I think you reset this. Playing around like this is a great way to learn, so I certainly applaud you for taking the time to explore lighting and explore what you can do with light and shadow. And I think the sculpture that you're working with here was really a kind of a perfect subject for you, because as you moved the light around, it really changed how the shadows fell and the detail that you could see in the sculpture. So Stephanie, thank you for providing this image for us today, and I hope everybody has a great day.